we ready to start?
I will hold it.
All right. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for a very important conversation about immigration rights and federal overreach happening here in the state. My name is Jordan Heiden. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Democracy Vermont Campaign Director at VPIRG, the Vermont Public Interest Research Group. Wow, thank you.
I'm
Not expecting that. I am joined tonight by Senator Becca White, Senator Tanya Vyhovsky, Representative Leonora Dodge, and Representative Graham Kleppner. Also joined by us tonight is, we've got a lot of great coalition partners in action with us. We've got Jordan Souder and Emmy Auld from the ACLU of Vermont. We've got Jill Martin Diaz. Oh yeah. We've got Jill Martin Diaz from VAAP, the Vermont Asylum Assistance Project, and sorry, I should pause for applause. And my colleague Josh Ferguson, also with VPIRG. Yes. So you're going to hear from all of these fine folks in just a moment, but first I'd love to just set the stage for why we're here tonight, go over a few housekeeping items, and just close out with a few shared group agreements. So first and foremost, we are here tonight because we know that Vermont is not immune to the federal harm that we're seeing all across the country, right? In places like Minnesota and places like Maine, we know this is happening here too. We know this because we have watched the detainments and detentions of folks like Mosin Madawi, Rumesa Ozturk, and most recently Stephen Tendo. So we are fully aware that our communities here are being impacted by ICE and CBP and just the federal government at large. And so we need to do more to protect our communities and to strengthen those protections here in the state. And so I just want to share it's a not so fun fact, but it's something that definitely sticks with me. It's come from migrant justice and the fact that in 2025, Vermont saw more than a 10-fold increase in immigration law enforcement activity. And so we have lots of work to do. Now, of course, we are not going to come to all of those solutions here tonight, but I do think having multiple conversations of this nature is really important in moving the needle forward. So I thank you for being a part of that. I thank you all for being a part of that. I'm talking a lot, so just really quick with housekeeping. If you need a restroom, it is on the second floor. You can take the stairs or the elevator around the corner. That's the easiest way to go. For folks who could not join us tonight, if you know of anyone who would like to tune in, we are live streaming right now on the VPIRG YouTube account. So feel free to send a text, let them know that that's where we are. We also have CCTV here tonight, and they are recording this entire program. So this will become available to anyone who needs it. Group agreements. So I just encourage you all to take the time that you need. We are going to have some likely difficult conversations this evening. These topics are heavy. And so please, if you need a moment for yourself, feel free to step away. Nothing wrong with that at all. And I just also ask that we give each other grace and show as much respect and kindness as possible as we navigate some of these tricky topics. So appreciate that in advance. And again, I've been talking a lot. I think that's good for right now. I'm going to pass it over now to our partners at ACLU and VAAP to share a few words about their work. And I'm so sorry, this mic, I can't bring it farther. You have to come around. So just take center stage.
Yes.
Say your names again.
Absolutely.
Slowly press over.
Understood. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Jordan Souder. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a policy advocate for the ACLU of Vermont, which a little bit about my position. I work largely in the State House, working alongside our partners and legislators to push for good legislation that promotes and defends our civil rights and liberties, and fighting against bad legislation that seeks to do the opposite. And we have been hard at work alongside our partners, many of whom here you see here today, to promote our suite of immigration-related bills as part of our Firewall for Freedom campaign to try to shore up state protections and fight back against a lot of the many federal abuses of power that we're seeing here today. And I'm joined here with my colleague, Emmy. Would you like to introduce yourself? And I'll pass the mic to her.
Hi everyone, I'm Emmy. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the field manager at ACLU. So most of my work is done in the community. So I am here to outreach to all Vermonters and connect you to our policy work, to our law work, and hear what matters to you and what you would like to see on the statewide level. So I am looking for input and feedback always. I love sitting down for coffee with people. It's my favorite part of my job. And if you are interested in engaging more with the ACLU, we would recommend that you join our action team, which is an email list that's just a little bump up from our big email list. It's for folks that are interested in taking action, coming to events, tabling, and you can come talk to me afterward if you would like to join. You just need an email address, no pressure for phone number or address or anything else if you are not comfortable with that. But thank you all for being here. People power is really important to me, so thanks for coming. And I will pass it to VAAP.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I am Jill Martin Diaz. I use they, them pronouns. This is Penny, and I am an immigration lawyer. I'm very lucky to direct the Vermont Asylum Assistance Project, or VAAP. We are a newer legal services program that has scaled up very rapidly in the last 2 years. We exist to address a pre-existing shortage in immigration lawyers in Vermont, a shortage that was exacerbated by the arrival of the latest anti-immigrant federal administration. And we have worked hard to capitalize on the increased awareness and attention on these pre-existing issues to try and create lasting infrastructure for Vermont, so that at the very least, some silver lining that can come from the harm of this year, this administration is increased access to justice for our very treasured non-citizen community members. We document our work fastidiously on our website and also on social media. So I wish I had the QR code poster with me, but absent that, our URL is vaapvt.org. That's right, vaap.org was taken. And you can subscribe to our newsletters and find out about the resources that we curate on our self-help library, find out about how to ask for legal help, how to ask for rapid response help, which is different, and learn about our programming there. You can also follow us on social media at VT Asylum. I just want to say, we immigration lawyers are really zeroed in on our superpower right now, which is representing individuals with claims to assert their rights and enjoy their rights, or to seek recourse when ICE violates their rights, which is very much par for the course. And that's a very niche type of work to do, and it's just one of the many different skill sets and community efforts that we need to make democracy run when it's under attack. So I just want to lift up the incredible lawmakers who are standing behind me, who look to VAAP for ideas, issues that are happening at the systems level that warrant system solutions, and to thank our organizing partners that have really been taking a lot of direction and ideas from our client communities to help us pursue a robust agenda this session. Thank you.
Huge thank you again to all of our coalition partners. Could not do this work without them. It is so incredible. So thank you. You're welcome to stay standing if you'd like. You can also grab a seat, whatever you prefer. All right, maybe one more quick round of applause for these incredible folks. See, I'm learning to pause for applause. Okay. So on to our panel discussion for this evening. And just to lay it out, I'm going to ask a few questions to these fine legislators here, and then we're going to open up the floor for some public comment and Q&A. At that point, my colleague Josh Ferguson is going to help us out. And if throughout this period of time you'd like to write down any questions or comments, we have note cards and pens. So feel free to just raise your hand, flag somebody down, and they will grab that for you. You might already have that, but just if you run out, you need some more writing material, let us know. And when that time comes, I will pass the mic over to Josh, and he will facilitate that second half of this evening. So does that all sound good? All right, awesome. Okay, so on to our panelists. clearly you all do so much, and we are definitely going to get into what that entails, but I think it would be great if we could start out with some brief introductions, and while doing so, perhaps explain what the motivation was behind getting so deeply involved in this prominent role that you're playing within, immigration rights this session. So Senator White, I will start with you, and maybe we can just pass it down the line, if that works.
Starting with the Senate. So thank you, Jordan. I'm Becca White, and I'm the Windsor County State Senator, along with Senator Allison Clarkson, Senator Joe Major. I, in brief, was in local government and thought, wow, I wish I could do what they're doing in the House of Representatives. And then I got into the House of Representatives for Vermont, and I said, dang, I wish I could do what they're doing in the Senate. And then I ran for the Senate. So I've kind of always just been incrementally moving into a position where I can do the good work that I was trying to punch upward on in the last job. My main role in this conversation has been because of a good friend of mine, Moza Madawi, who was detained last year unexpectedly. You all know the story at this point. If you don't know the story, come talk to me after. But basically, that did not seem like a reality that was possible to me. Leading up to the event, I told him I thought it was extremely unlikely. I was not living in the reality that we are all now living in. And it wasn't until literally I saw a man taken by masked men with assault, with gun protection gear in unmarked vehicles until it came to me. So good for you for recognizing it before hopefully that situation has occurred so directly in front of your face. So I feel like that's really my only big role in this is getting to talk about a really good friend and trying to constantly push to make sure that never happens to anyone ever again.
You can work with Tanya. Just also want to flag there is a second mic, so when we get to that half, maybe it's easier to use. But whatever.
Senator Tanya Vyhovsky. I represent the Chittenden Central District, which we are in. I represent this district with Senator Martine LaRocque-Ulick and Senator Phil DeRuth. I am a clinical social worker, and I work largely with adolescents and young adults. And I actually did my first internship with Connecting Cultures here in Burlington, working with refugees and asylum seekers. And I was not actually as surprised that we were in the position that we were in. In fact, I've been alerting people that we're headed in that direction for quite some time. And I think that that's in part because I am the grandchild of two refugees. And I grew up having conversations at our shared dinner table that were probably pretty different than a lot of the conversations many of my peers were having. My grandmother fled Hungary when she was 15 in 1956. And my grandfather, after many years of fighting for Ukrainian independence and 2 different trips to prisoner of war camps in Siberia, eventually left Ukraine. And so I am deeply familiar with what authoritarianism looks like because of the conversations we had about their histories at the dinner table. And so I come to this work very differently. And for many years felt very alone in saying, hey, we're headed in this really terrible direction. And I'm thankful to everyone who's here to do the work so that we do better.
Buenas noches. My name is Leonora Dodge. I am a House rep representing Chittenden 23, which is part of Essex Town and part of the city of Essex Junction. I'm in my 4th year. I got involved in politics completely unexpectedly. I got a text message from a sitting rep who I thought had butt dialed me. I've been until then I had really lived that, the personal is political type of existence, and had spent many years in Vermont trying to build bridges for the Latino community. And for me, it was really about Latina moms that felt very isolated and felt like it was like us against the world, trying to prove to our kids that it was worth speaking our language, being proud of our culture, and finding other little kids that they could connect with and and play with and fight over toys with
in Spanish while eating good food, and seeing, sort of aunties, that they wouldn't have had without this community. So I had been doing that for a long time, and kind of just taking with me my role that my culture is worthy and beautiful, and that my kids needed to know that, and my friends' kids. And then I got involved at the electoral level, and I guess I'm still trying to do the same thing. And similarly, coming from my father's an immigrant from Ireland, my mother's from Mexico. And I grew up around a lot of other immigrants, right? Like family by choice. And so many of our family members, quote unquote family members, were escaping dictatorships, finding ways to get past the trauma of, not knowing whether your family member would come home that day, wouldn't get disappeared by the military. Or death squads. And so, those were my kindergarten friends. We were all learning French up in Montreal in our classe d'accueil, for immigrant kids, and speaking all of our crazy languages at home, and learning English from TV in the street. And then I came to Burlington, and it's just very different. Immigration and immigrants are like the 128th item on people's minds. It's really not front of mind. And so this is weird, because finally, right? Like finally people care. We can bring all kinds of people to the table who realize that, as Jill Martin Diaz says, immigrants are the canary in the coal mine, right? Like, we know that our society will start with the most vulnerable, to scapegoat, take away due process, not consider their economic well-being, and reduce them to basically just labor, and that we can just exploit, and we don't need to take their needs into account. And so I saw migrant justice acting against that very strongly, and I joined them as a volunteer, as a driver, as a translator, and was so excited when I got elected that we could collaborate on bills and legislation together, and I could do it in Spanish. And so that's been one of the most incredibly rewarding, win. Vermont wins, immigrants win, and the legislature, I think, is better informed when we have those bridges. So that's kind of me. Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Graham Kleppner. I represent a district in Burlington that starts 2 streets that way, so we're not quite in my district. And on the subject of collaboration, it has been a delight. Representative Dodge and I co-sponsored the No Secret Police legislation in the House. And, I suppose my connection to immigration is somewhat bifurcated, because my family has been in New England since 1631. So our memory of being immigrants has faded a little bit. But on the other hand, 2 of my children are immigrants. So sort of have both experiences. But for me, these issues and the attacks on immigrants in our country these days it's not an immigration issue. It is a fundamental human decency issue. It is a fundamental Declaration of Universal Human Rights issue. It is a fundamental constitutional issue. And, it has never been more true that when one of us is harmed, all of us are harmed. And that is why I've joined this gang. And just the introductions here tonight made me realize what a big, powerful coalition we have coming to protect immigrants, but to protect everyone's rights from many different directions. You know, the ACLU and VAAP and the legislators and VPIRG and the city council in Burlington are all acting together, which is a really beautiful thing.
Thank you for your patience with the mic configuration here. Really appreciate the opportunity to get to know you all a little bit better, and certainly appreciate where it is you're coming into this work. So thank you for that little bit of context there. Next question. There are several bills this session that really aim to strengthen protections for both immigrant and mixed status families. Those include law enforcement identification, sensitive locations, legal representation, and more. So as we are beginning to approach crossover, I'm curious to know what progress has been made so far and what barriers remain. And this time, Senator Vyhovsky, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Absolutely. So, good news, bad news. The law enforcement identification bill has passed out of the Senate. It is in a slightly weakened form from how we started, and the largest change to that bill is that the criminal penalty for violating the law being passed was removed, and there is a two-tiered civil penalty. So that bill requires that law enforcement not be wearing masks or disguises unless there are some exceptions in the bill, because there are legitimate reasons why, if scuba diving is a, if you're trying to find something on the bottom of the lake, we would like you to wear your oxygen mask. If you are ill and for some reason have to be out, we would like you to wear your N95. If it's negative 40 degrees and you're searching for a hiker, we would like you to cover your face. But it prohibits the use of facial coverings for the purpose of disguise. And it requires that law enforcement identify who they are and what agency they're working with visibly on their uniform or on their person. And for violating this, for a first offense, there's a $1,000 civil penalty, and for a second offense, there's a $2,500 civil penalty. There used to be, for a third offense, a misdemeanor criminal penalty, and that was removed. And I have concerns with this given how much funding is going into ICE and CBP. It seems to me that they could just keep paying those fines again and again and again. But that is in the House Judiciary Committee, and hopefully that gets fixed there. The other bill that has passed the Senate is S209, and that is the sensitive locations bill. So in 2018, the state of Vermont joined other states in saying that warrantless civil arrest cannot happen in courthouses. And in this bill, we are expanding the list of places where that cannot happen to include schools, medical facilities, daycare facilities, churches, social service organizations. And the place where I'm deeply concerned is that we removed state and government buildings from the bill. We know in 2017, the state of New York passed a law that said state and government buildings, these types of arrests couldn't happen. It was challenged in court. It was upheld. So that's the one thing in the bill we know we can do and would be upheld in the courts. And our state and government buildings are where people go to do the business of their daily life, pay their taxes, get vaccinations, visit with a caseworker. And so I'm deeply concerned that that got taken out of the bill, and am continuing to work with the House and with the governor's office to come up with language that they can support. And one thing you all can do to help with that would be to call the speaker's office, call the governor's office, and tell them that you want that language back in the bill. We do have additional bills that are on the wall, and I don't know that they're going to make crossover. I have a bill that would prohibit state agencies collecting immigration data under the Supremacy Clause. If those agencies have that data and ICE asks or CBP asks for it, they have to share it, which to me means then they just shouldn't have it. And that bill has not gotten a single hearing. We've also had conversations about limiting state resources to support ICE and CBP operations, and that has not moved. So there's more we can do, and I know there's more the House is doing that hopefully they'll be sending our way to work on in the Senate, because we do like to kind of divide and not reproduce work. We can get a lot more done that way. So I'm going to pass it with that.
Same question.
So I would just add that H849 is a little bit of a cure for the limitations on being able to do a suit. Because H849, which does have traction in House Judiciary, is an act relating to a civil action for damages for interference with state or federal constitutional rights by any government official. And so it is probably pretty easy to say that somebody who is not clearly an officer with a right to stop you, or who manhandles you, or who doesn't let you talk to an attorney when you have the right to one, or et cetera, et cetera. A lot of the problems in our due process with immigration enforcement are now, our state will affirmatively give people the right to sue. And so it's interesting that this bill, which is much more universally applicable and powerful, is getting a hearing, but not in the context of immigration defense. So but that is something that could be helpful. We don't know whether it's going to make it out. The other bill that, speaking of legal defense, I will be very disappointed if we pass the bill that grants you the right to sue, but then we don't pass H742, which gives the state the funding to help indigent, vulnerable immigrants who are caught in a really very, very tough legal landscape and have no access to legal representation. So H742 is a bill that I worked with ACLU and VAAP and VPIRG and Migrant Justice to try to promote some state funding for to meet the really, really explosive high demand. VAAP made a really great case last year and mobilized this really great philanthropic effort to fundraise. But that was just to match the moment at the time. And a year later, we still haven't fully raised. I say we, I'm not involved in that. The state still hasn't raised the original amount that was the goal, just to match the numbers that we used to have. And so I think it's really important that we are putting our money where our mouth is, and that if we're giving all these rights, that we also give the means to enforce them.
So I'll add just a couple of words to that. I will to address Senator Vyhovsky's very accurate point that the exclusion of state and local municipal buildings from the safe areas is really damaging. I did speak with the chair of House Judiciary yesterday about that, and he seems very inclined to add it back into the bill. So I think we will add one more little bit of protection there. For those of you who may not follow the arcana of State House rules, crossover is a date that the legislature chooses each year by which bills have to pass out of one house, one chamber, in order to be considered by the other. So if your bill doesn't get out of committee and out of your chamber by that date, then it is not going to become law this year. So it is the date towards which we are all sprinting, and it's like a week away or something, right? So it's when the pressure gets turned up a little bit. Rep Dodge and I and the almost 30 co-sponsors of the House bill to prevent ICE from wearing masks and being in unmarked clothing and unmarked vehicles. Went back and forth a little bit on the name of the bill. The Nothing to Hide policing bill. We ended up calling it the No Secret Police bill, consistent with other states. But I did read recently that the bill in New Jersey, just introduced by 2 Democratic members there, to give citizens the right to sue federal law enforcement if their rights have been violated. In a very New Jersey twist, I will say this slowly so that you can put the acronym together in your head, but it is the Fight Unlawful Conduct, Keep Individuals and Communities Empowered bill in New Jersey.
Well, they've really shared the big highlights. The only other bill I would mention is S227, which is in Senate Education, and it looks to have our schools create plans in case ICE were to arrive. Either you could picture the numerous scenarios, but we should have a plan because that's a tactic they use. And I think we truly did cover every bill, but
I think that the one thing that, or nuance that I just want to make sure we communicate is also that, for instance, public buildings were excluded, and we do have the right. So that was kind of too bad, but that is going to get fixed. But places of worship are a little tricky because we already give that right. Private entities, right, are protected. Property owners can say, you can't come in here. You can't make use of my resources or my space constitutionally. So I think that it also falls on us to make sure that our community members are educated as to what our rights actually already are, and that so you could put up a sign that just clearly indicates, in this business, this is only the entrance for paying customers, or you could say this is only the entrance for staff, or clients, or patients, or students, right? Just like you wouldn't have to let somebody into your house. It's like ICE are vampires, really. They need an invitation. But sometimes they don't obey that, right? But that's important. So if places of worship get taken out, don't fear. It's because they're trying to be consistent with what constitutional right are we using to write this bill.
I want to add one piece of nuance about S209. So my understanding is that the language came out on the Senate side because concerns that if that language stayed in, the governor may veto the bill. And so this is why the governor needs to hear from you, that you want that in the language. And because he is, at this point, I've reached out repeatedly to talk to them about that language, and they will not get back to me. So we're flying a little bit blind. So please call the governor. And S227, if people want to know more about that, it's based after the policy that the Winooski School District put in place in Winooski that has worked, has been utilized. And I worked with the administration in Winooski to craft a bill that would work at the state level to implement those policies in all of our schools.
Thank you all for the thoughtful responses there. I just want to flag that we did hear some calls to action, and so really important that you sign in, because I'm going to send a follow-up email with exactly how you can take those actions. So keep those coming throughout this conversation. We're going to add them up, and we're going to make sure these folks can take those actions. There is also a legislative one-pager on the table if you missed that, so a really helpful briefing on all of the bills that are being discussed here. Okay, so moving on to the next question. Emergency services, local law enforcement, and state agencies often interact with immigrant communities, and oftentimes in moments of crisis as well. So how can Vermont ensure that these interactions are both safe and equitable and do not create inadvertent risk or fear for these residents? So we'll start with Representative Dodge, and anyone can add on.
Sorry.
not a problem. Okay, so I'll just read it from scratch. Okay.
Which question?
Third.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay.
Got it.
Mondays are hard.
So, number one, be aware that thanks to migrant activists, we have one of the nation's most robust, fair, and impartial policing protections, which deny police the right to collaborate with ICE. And there's sort of like a floor, if you will, of the degree to which there can be any sort of interaction, and then each municipality can be more stringent, even more stringent. Like you can't even have an agent on the scene in an emergency or coming into your building to use, to the station, et cetera, et cetera. There is a committee, basically, of law enforcement and some advocates who kind of oversee the rules and the application of that throughout the state. So it's not necessarily a legislative process anymore. But so that's important to be aware that that you need to be alert, and you can assert that right in Vermont and document any abuses. I think that the crisis. One of the things that can often happen is that we will jump to action. And without necessarily getting educated, and what can happen often in Vermont is not getting educated by the people in the community that you're trying to help, the very people that you are concerned about helping. And so I would just say that really taking your cue from advocacy groups that are on the ground, like if you're trying to help the attorneys. Talk to, get educated if you're trying to help migrant workers connect with migrant justice. And before contacting legislators, contact VPIRG and figure, and by contact, that could be as easily as getting on their website. But, in a era when it sounds horrible to get on one more email list, I cannot urge you enough to really empower yourself by connecting with good, strong, capable, and informed advocacy groups. Vermont is so lucky to count many of those. And, it's no mystery that VPIRG, right, which started as like a consumer interest organization, is taking on immigration abuse as their, flag kind of issue this year. And it's because they went door to door and they found out that this is what Vermonters are concerned with. And so I can't thank enough, like the young, one thing that you could also do is make sure you don't slam the door on those nice young kids that show up at your.
Can they knock on your door?
We have some ex-VPIRGers among us on the stage, I can tell. She's got that VPIRG energy too. I could never slam the door on your face. There's no way. There's just no way. Monthly sustain. Yeah, so those are some ideas.
I think we're very lucky to live in Vermont in many ways. The mayor here in Burlington and Chief Burke here and the commander of the state police have all expressed very clearly that they are clear that their first duty is to protect Vermonters. And so I think when push comes to shove, if ICE is breaking the law, I feel fairly confident that Vermont law enforcement will stand on the side of Vermonters and will not stand on the side of ICE. And I heard someone who's working on this issue nationally talking, who said that our best protection against ICE is our cell phones. And when they are on the street, if one person starts videotaping, that's helpful. But if 30 do it, ICE really changes their behavior. So I think all those phones out and hit video as soon as you see anything of concern.
Yeah, I mean, I went on Instagram Live. I didn't know what to do. So you don't always have to be like figuring it out in the moment. But to your question about like what can municipalities and local government and law enforcement do, we have a welcoming ordinance in my hometown, which is Hartford, and we worked on that years ago. So it's been in place. And I believe you also have some, I don't know what your descriptor is, but we call it the Welcoming Hartford Ordinance. And the idea is that essentially we don't give information to Immigration and Customs Enforcement when we're doing law enforcement. And there's other towns in my district that also have similar ways of not working alongside ICE. We also worked on a bill last session, I forgot, it was like one of our early wins, that stopped the ability for the deputization of local law enforcement for Immigration and Customs Enforcement in the instance that the governor now has to sign even in an emergency. It's a little complex, but there was a bit of a loophole there where we, I think all collectively, whether or not you agree with the general concept of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, you probably don't want also your local resources being drained to fund it. So even if you're someone who's not a part of the conversation we're having, those folks are compelled by, I don't want my tax dollars being used for something that isn't what I want my tax dollars being used for, and local law enforcement is already strapped and they can see that. So one good thing to do is get involved locally and explain what the economic reality is to other voters when it comes to local law enforcement working with ICE, because that means they're not helping look at a burglary. You know, it's real deal. It is a zero-sum game, unfortunately, with our law enforcement in Vermont because we have so few. And then the only other thing I would say, and I say this as an atheist, I am also a member of a Unitarian Universalist congregation, which welcomes me. And the faith community has been a huge part of this conversation and was a very big part of my experience because the way that we had built connection through mutual aid and just already having community connections with people from around the area led to us being able to respond very quickly. When someone is taken in your community, you basically have to react, what I've experienced, as if they have been kidnapped. And then you have to go on the press tour of how amazing and wonderful and beautiful this human being is and how worthy they are. And you have to have a lot of people validate why it matters that this person was taken for that person to be released in a speedy manner. And that's just the facts on the ground that I experienced. And thank goodness we had a wide-ranging Unitarian Universalist network in the Upper Valley that said, we saw him one time and you know what? We care now. So if you are ever going to experience that, it's kind of like you have to act like they've been kidnapped and you've got a window of time to make your case to the media. And what we found was there are great groups like Migrant Justice, like the lawyers that Mosen had hired, who were able to very quickly get talking points out and basic information because I didn't know his age and people kept asking me how old he was. So there's basic facts on the ground you can collect as a community about people in your life and to plan it out as well. We haven't talked about estate planning, but there was a bill, I believe, to help in case of children being left. We did also some work around that. So I don't know if we have that specific question, but.
Yeah, so last biennium, we worked on a bill to allow parents to set up a plan so that if they are detained, their children don't just automatically end up in DCF custody, but they're able to have a delegation of those caretaking duties. I do want to talk about the fair and impartial policing policy. I think it's an incredibly important policy, and one of the challenges is knowing whether or not that policy is being followed. As of the beginning of this legislative session, not every law enforcement agency in the state of Vermont was sort of signed on and actively using that policy, despite the fact that it is the policy. I think it may be more powerful to adopt much of that policy into law. because I think laws have more power than policy, and this may have changed since the beginning of the session. A lot has, but at the beginning of the session, there was at least one of our county sheriffs that was under investigation for violations of the policy. So I think now is an important time too to think about police oversight and community police oversight, and really making sure that we, the people, have our eyes in on what our law enforcement organizations are doing. And that is not directly tied to immigration. It's tied to, these are the people that we are asking to uphold our laws and to keep us safe. We should know what they're doing. There's a couple bills on the wall in Senate Government Operations from last year that probably aren't going to move this year, but I think that we need to start thinking about what does community policing look like. With regards to state agencies, we could move laws that say state agencies can't collect immigration data. But I also think we need to talk about language justice. We need to talk about making sure our emergency response systems are available in different languages. We need to make sure that the Language Justice Project, who has been doing excellent work that, frankly, the state should be doing to make sure that key emergency response is translated and accessible in both spoken and written languages, because some of our most commonly spoken English or languages that aren't English in Vermont actually are not written, they are just spoken. And they are asking for a small appropriation from the General Assembly to continue doing that work, and we should give that to them. And our budget committees need to hear that we value that and think that that's important. And moving forward, we need to continue our movement in establishing the Office of New Americans here in Vermont, so that there is a place that is really holding a lot of this that is at the state level. We farm out a lot of work that state government should be doing to grassroots nonprofits, and then we don't fund them. And so I think that money is another really key piece here. And language justice spans more than just what we're talking about now. It's ensuring all of our websites are translated into the most commonly spoken languages and both formatted for our phones and our computers. And our Office of Racial Equity put out a report a couple of years ago, and Vermont is doing a terrible job on language justice.
Thank you, everyone. 2 more questions from me, and then we will open it up to the floor. So while it is impossible to forget the things that I'm about to mention, I'm hoping we can consider for just a moment the constant congressional scrutiny, the very unfortunate killings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, and the very recent ICE surge that has happened in Maine. Is there anything that we can possibly do to prevent these additional layers of federal overreach from touching Vermont? And Representative Kleppner, we'll start with you and bring it back around.
There's not a great deal that we can do, in fact, to prevent busloads of ICE agents from rolling into Burlington tonight and waking up tomorrow morning with our streets full of them. I think, our congressional delegation is certainly very strong on these issues, and we can let the 3 of them know and their offices know that we are supportive and grateful and need their standing strong against federal incursions into human rights. I think our best defense is all the work that we've talked about to, when ICE does arrive, everything that we can possibly do to ensure that they act within the bounds of the law, and that we can hold them accountable for that is the best we can do.
Okay. There was a hand up out there, really excited. I think she's going to do 2 more questions, and then she's going to, but just the enthusiasm to that response. That was a very depressing answer, unfortunately. That was, so I'm going to try to think of a good thing we can do, because you're right, there isn't a lot that we can do. So back to the community mutual aid bit. You can start to reawaken your COVID-19 networks. If you were delivering food to someone, you can flex those muscles again. That seemed to be what was so successful in Minneapolis, was just watching how they had like a radio system and everyone had whistles and people had plans, and it was all driven around this community action that they had been building over years collectively. So I think Vermont is actually extremely well positioned. And it was one of the reasons why I was so disappointed when the governor in his State of the State and his budget address did not mention anything to do with this conversation, because I think, and I'm grateful for the response that he had post the execution of Alex Preddy, where he said enough is enough. But I think Vermont will react in the same way Minneapolis reacted when people started to get taken. I mean, everyone has a neighbor that they can think of who is potentially at risk for this scenario. And I know you're all going to show up if that person has a knock on their door and they don't want to open it. You know, we are going to show up. So I think the best thing to do is, if you have the ability to go to a training, Migrant Justice puts on trainings, there's rapid response trainings. Think about what your slot in the mutual aid network is. Maybe it's not showing up with your cell phone. Because maybe you don't have an iPhone. Maybe instead it's being the person who can give a ride to someone discreetly. Maybe it's the person who can help pay for the meal that gets delivered versus be the person delivering the meal. There's a lot of community mutual aid stuff that we have to flex our COVID-19 muscles on again that will help us. And then on the state level, I think we're trying to do it. Every single bill that we have introduced is trying to combat the idea that the federal government has full control over this. Because we do have the ability under the 10th Amendment of the Constitution to do things that the federal government has not prescribed, basically, that they have control of. So we can control things like the masking piece. We're doing it because it's all law enforcement. It's not just ICE agents who are covered. There's sneaky ways that we can hit back on it from that vantage point.
Yeah, I want to build on that. I think that we need to be in community, and we need to be in community broadly with people that maybe we don't know that we have a lot in common with, and we need to be building those community ties. I think there's actually a lot of community development work that is needed, and we can start that right now by saying hi to someone in the room we don't know and hearing their stories and learning more. I definitely want to plug the Migrant Justice Rapid Response Training. The ACLU does Know Your Rights trainings, because it's also really important that we know our rights and that we can help educate others that they know their rights. Vermont is not immune, though I do think due to the rural nature and small number of people here, we're not a very likely first target. But that gives us time to plan, not time to sit back and wait, but time to plan. And there are people in our communities that have been planning for this. Find out who they are, connect with them, ask them what they need, because they are some of the most vulnerable should this happen. You know, and I look at what Winooski did with their sanctuary schools policy. They built this type of rapid response. They had a plan and they had full community involvement. And so when they had to deploy their plan, they had volunteers going to people's homes and walking those kids to school. They had volunteers boarding the buses and riding the buses with the students, because sometimes we need to use the privilege we have to stand in the way of people who are vulnerable. And so I think it is really important, not that we simply rely on the networks that were there and sometimes worked and sometimes didn't during the COVID crisis, because depending on what community you spoke to, some of those networks worked really well and some people were left behind. And we can't let that happen. So we have to strengthen those things and look for the places where we can spread our community to be more welcoming, more open, and more responsive when someone is threatened.
I just have I would just say I had written all of those things like bystander training, know your rights training, schools. I would just encourage you to get involved in whatever capacity feels good for you, right? Like you might be ready to go and help translate. You might be ready to go and make a huge food donation. You might be ready to go to your food pantry and add more hours, right? So that people who are afraid to go, you might be able to deliver that, the meals, etc. That's what's great, is that, we can all we are one massive victory garden just waiting to be planted and harvested, right? We know how to do this. You got this. I would say that my biggest concern is the kids. You know, so if you have the capacity to become a temporary guardian, please get in touch with Migrant Justice and Vermont Legal Aid and groups that are setting up the temporary guardianship. That scenario keeps me up at night, and I think anybody who's seen the pictures of Liam Conejo Ramos and others, that's my biggest nightmare. So if you can do anything at all, but my hope is that, COVID, that was a good flex, but then also the resiliency, right? Like, we've put legislation together that talks about resiliency with climate disasters. And so I think that those are good models, but they take money. And it comes down to, if you care about this, and you want the state to put their money where their mouth is, we need to hear it from folks, that I would rather put my state dollars towards freeing somebody than jailing them. And I think most of us feel that way too. And so I know that there are a lot of competing needs, and we are facing, really high numbers of people who have lost homes, people who are unable to afford rent, food costs. All of that is true. It's hurting all of us, but we shouldn't force our immigrant population to bear the brunt of all of that alone.
To the cost piece, the top 5% of Vermonters will see over $400 million in tax cuts under the Trump budget, and we could recapture those and have them paid to the state of Vermont to put into these things. The top 1% is looking at an average cut of $57,000 per filer per year. The next 4% of earners are looking at, on average, an average cut of $18,000 per filer per year. And we do have a bill in Senate Finance that would capture 100% of that federal cut into our coffers for the top 1% and 10% of the cut for the next 4%. And the reason we chose 10% is because some of the people in that 4% may also see ACA subsidy cuts. And so we wanted to hold them harmless. But that's not a tax increase on our wealthiest Vermonters. It is the status quo. And that bill would raise over $400 million that we could be investing in language justice, in housing, in healthcare for Vermonters. And it's S282 if people want to advocate for it.
Thank you all. Really appreciate that this question led to even more calls to action, particularly surrounding mutual aid, rapid response, and funding. It's perfect because my last question is about action opportunities for folks. So if there is anything else to add there, please kind of just feel free to take the mic. And then if not, I'm going to pass it over to Josh to open up the floor for other questions. So are there any final action opportunities that folks should be made aware of tonight?
Okay, so we had a couple resolutions that we voted on, and you should look at how your representative, how your senator voted on those. And then on the Senate side, we had two folks who voted no on S208 and S209. And you better believe me, I'm running a candidate against both of them. And we will run candidates against anyone who shows that they don't have the moral courage on this issue. So my call to action to you is, if you have friends in Rutland County who would like to run for office, if you have friends in, I think, what, Essex County, I would like you to run for office. So, in Essex Town.
Not Essex Town.
Not Essex Town, Essex County. And then you can speak to your House members about their side, but that's the Senate. Any action?
I think the action item, and it is broad, is to stay involved, think about the things that are important, and reach out and talk to us. All too frequently, this is not as true this year, but all too frequently, it's quite silent. And I may be fighting for things, and I'm hearing like, no, nobody really wants that. And what I've learned in years past in the work that I've done is that we make the most powerful and transformative policy when we work both inside and outside of the building. So please reach out, whether it's because you support something or you think we should be doing something different, because that is the best democracy, is one that's participatory. Democracy is a team sport, so let's join us.
I think that one of the other things that we often forget about is to celebrate the wins, you know? And so, like for me, just seeing all of your faces tonight is a win, and I'm gonna try to hold on to that. And you know, we've done some cool things, and we need to make sure that the laws that are on the books are alive and felt and experienced in reality. So, for instance, you know, there was this closing loopholes for, you know, in an emergency, in a declared emergency, we can, you know, bypass all due process or whatever civil rights or, you know, that we've ever written into Vermont law. So we closed that loophole last year. That was great. Yeah. Go Senate. This is a win. We ensured that regardless of migratory status, if you impressed your high school teachers enough into writing you a great recommendation letter and you got really good grades and you were an amazing volunteer, that you should be able to access in-state tuition and not be treated like an international student, right? So that was a big win. Access to VSAC grants, that was a big win. We passed health care for pregnant, regardless of migratory status, for pregnant people and for children. We are no longer allowed to discriminate based on migratory status for housing access. You know, these things need to be celebrated and recognized when somebody says, wow, my guidance counselor thought that I wouldn't be able to access, you know, this grant, and actually I called VSAC and they're all about it. So those are good things.
You know, I would just repeat what we said earlier, which is between migrant justice and the ACLU and VAAP and VPIRG, there is a perfect role or a perfect way to be active for everyone in our community. So I would encourage everyone to reach out to them and ask what you can do to help, and one of them will have something that feels just right to you.
One last thing to add. I think we will pass the school bill, but you can reach out to your school board right now and ask your school board to move forward on policy like that. Winooski didn't wait for the state to act. You don't have to either.
All right, and how about a round of applause for our legislators? All right, and now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Josh, and he is going to kick us off with some public comment and Q&A.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Josh Ferguson. I'm a field organizer for VPIRG. And if you have a written question, please raise it in the air. And my VPIRG staffer will be around to collect it from you. I just want to review how I'm going to facilitate this.
They go to the police department and then they pull something on themselves. It's called a name check, especially for an older white gentleman. Pull your name, check, just get, pay the 10 cents, it costs to get, and you'd be kind of surprised at what they might say about you. It's probably not accurate or flattering. And I'm talking about, if you lived here over 5 years,
Thank you, sir. We appreciate that. Have a good night.
Please, I'm going to go use that. These guys to the help.
So the first question that I have here is in regards to S208, because we have seen a similar bill be passed in California. And so folks are wondering if this law can be enforced due to the supremacy clause. And then they cite that similar law in California.
To the Judiciary Committee.
I was on the Judiciary Committee. So very important piece about the California law versus the Vermont law, and this is a critical difference. The California law did not apply to California State Police. It applied only to federal police. And under the Supremacy Clause, there's sort of two things that we have to look at. One, is this law discriminatory? Is it discriminating against the federal government? And the other one is, are we regulating the federal government? Or is this a law that allows them to do their job and they just might have to do it in a slightly different way? And so the California law actually, right on the day that S208 was in transition from the Senate to the House, the judge returned a verdict on the challenge to the California law that essentially said, you can do this, but you can't discriminate. So California is going to rewrite that law. It will likely still be challenged in the courts, but the Vermont law is much stronger in that it applies to all law enforcement exactly the same way. And so that is one piece that with the ruling in California and the way that we crafted our law, we have a much better chance of being upheld within our state powers to regulate how police operate in our state. There has been a previous case on something entirely different that would have required certain state licensure for federal agents, and that was not upheld. But it was much more sort of regulatory of like, you have to hold this state license as opposed to you can't wear a mask.
And I would just add that, there was not a lot of resistance to this law in Vermont from municipal or state law enforcement, because Vermont municipal and state law enforcement already wear uniforms that identify them by name and branch of law enforcement, and they already don't wear masks to hide their identities almost ever. So we were able to claim that we were passing a law that applied equally to everyone, when really we were just getting the ice.
Thank you. And those in the audience who may be concerned about the public commentary aspect, we did get a lot of written questions, so I plan to go through 2 of these and then turn it over to one of you all to speak into the mic, just so we're all on the same page. The next question is about 742, House Bill 742. And sorry, I've got my cards mixed up. Yes. So it's kind of a 2-part question. First of all, 742 deals with detainees in prisons in Vermont getting access to legal representation. So this question wants you all to answer. Do you know what it is like being a detainee in these facilities right now, with this lack of representation, and kind of in tandem to that? How do we get 742, quote unquote, off the wall?
So that bill is ambitious. It's really trying to right a lot of wrongs. Partially, it is the conditions by which people are held, detained. I'm hearing from the lawyers who I'm pointing towards our immigration lawyer expert, who has, if you've never tried to look at what the committees do in the House and the Senate. I advise you to watch the testimony when they invited VAAP, when they invited the ACLU to come into the Corrections and Institutions Committee, the House Committee on Corrections and Institutions. The abuses in our facilities are just horrifying. There are people being denied interpretation. There are people being denied medical care. There are people being denied their access to a computer so that they can attend their court hearing, their online court hearing. You mess up anything in an immigration case and you're done. You're done. So, I wouldn't go so far as to impugn, like purposeful sabotage, because I don't think we're organized enough for that, frankly. So I can only say that it's just further proof that Vermont is just not, just was not ready for the sheer, number, going from 100 detainees to 900 detainees, going from, just a couple dozen apprehensions to just so many apprehensions at, a gas station, place of work, outside of a clinic, just at your immigration hearing. So the conditions are pretty wretched, and they are just like you are put into a section of the same facilities where we are holding people who have committed really pretty heinous acts and have been found and tried and so our the conditions are pretty bad, and the access to due process is even worse when you take into account language barriers, poor health, and the fact that everybody who is held in our facilities and is accused of a crime is given an attorney, guaranteed, if they don't hire one. If they're, they're supposed to get some kind of access, but we don't fund anything like that for immigration legal defense. And the courts, the trials are, you have far fewer rights in an immigration civil case than you do in a criminal case. So you are really at the mercy if you don't have legal defense. That's why you are 11 times more likely to actually win a case if you have legal defense than if you don't.
Thank you, Representative. I'd like to open up the floor to the microphone. I have my friend here. I'd like you to speak first, if you wouldn't mind, and then just for the rest of the room, we are starting to run out of time, and just ask that we keep things concise, question formatted, and respectable for the community we're in. Thank you.
So first of all, I want to thank all of you for being, working on these very important issues, like actually being boots on the ground. My name is Bruce Wilson. I'm Vermont Human Rights Commissioner. And I know you work with a lot of our team, Big Hartman in Montpelier. And one thing that I was thinking about, because I'm also sitting on Vermont State Police for impartial policing for over 10 years, they do a pretty decent job, but the officers around the state, they don't do a good job. So what you were saying, Senator Tanya, is that I think they need more training. You go back to Pittsburgh or whatever they got to do, but it's pitiful how they operate. Especially with people who look like me, POC, Black Pop, whatever. And so I just, once again, I just want to thank you. And March 14th, we're doing Know Your Rights at Burlington City Hall. You probably got it something to your inbox already. And we're still looking for people to come and present and talk. So March 14th, 3 to 6. I'm sure our partners have sent it. You probably seen it. Big yellow things there and so on. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Hi there. Good evening, everybody. I just wanted to kind of level set and, establish an Overton window for everybody, listening and attending here tonight, and to ask the nice representatives who have came out to, kind of establish and maybe make a delineation for people at home between, what your collective views are on the type of immigration you guys are referring to. Obviously, immigration is a broad term, but the people of Vermont want to know, are you guys talking about, immigrants that have came here legally, or immigrants who have maybe not came here legally? And which, if you support one, do you not support the other?
Remember my ancestor came here in 1631? That was illegal. And so generally, the data is very clear that immigrants, whatever their status in terms of legality and visas and so forth, the immigrant community commits fewer crimes than the native-born U.S. community does. So we are not talking about lawless masses coming across our borders. What we are talking about, with or without documents, is the people who keep our food on our tables, the people who take care of us in hospitals. And I will say I absolutely support the right of everyone who conducts themselves legally and is here to respect community standards and work hard and contribute to our community to be here regardless of their legal status.
Yeah, I think that I know so many people that are trying to quote unquote do it the right way, and the rules just get changed, and you are just somebody trying to make it go, like, start a business, send money for your family to be able to build a house at home. Immigration has been a win-win for this country and many other countries for centuries. Vermont would not have the farms that are now being sustained by people with Spanish and Mayan surnames wouldn't exist without the people with the French last names who came, only 100 years ago. And we are shooting ourselves in the foot by, I think, focusing on, did the person come here legally or not? And when what we really need to focus on is, what is the right law? Our country's history is full of really, really bad laws. And so I think that we are going to be far better off. We have a whole legislative process that is based on the fact that we all agree that basically laws keep needing to change to adapt to new realities. And so just like, I think there was a law when I was growing up, there was the sort of urban legend of, like, you're supposed to not be able to tie your horse to the post outside of the post office or something like that. That we have a lot of very deliberate ways that we have historically excluded people through perfectly good laws that, you know, get passed. So yeah, just because it's suddenly illegal to exist on this side of the border isn't reason enough to not try to integrate folks to our economy. The other day there was a research study that we talk about, like, the cost, right? That maybe giving legal representation or giving health insurance or educating immigrants. Just in Vermont, just Vermont alone in 2023, immigrants, who are about 30,000 foreign-born people in the state, just those 30,000 people paid $171.3 million in 1 year alone in state and local taxes. They paid $142.4 million into Social Security, and many of those dollars will never go back to the person who paid for them if they are working on a dairy farm and aren't, you know, and don't have access to a Social Security number. And so really, immigrants are our backbone, and we've relied on them and exploited them and put all of the risk, all of the legal risk on them, and not on the people that are frankly making the most money from their labor. And that's not necessarily the farmers. In our state, it's not really the farmers that are making the money, but it's the big, massive corporations that are selling their milk back to us.
I don't want to repeat things that were already said, and without getting into a deep dive into the lines that we've created or the land that we may have stolen from this group or that group, or parts of our country that were previously parts of another country that we're now saying people who are from that country can't be there. What I do want to say is, in addition to everything my colleagues said, we're not only talking about immigration and how someone ended up in the United States. We're talking about democracy, and we're talking about due process. And if due process does not apply to all of us, then due process does not apply to any of us. Because if you do not have the right to due process, regardless of whether you are here on a visa or a green card or with no documentation at all, then there is nothing to stop people in power from snatching you off the street, saying you're here illegally, and disappearing you because you can't prove it without due process. So I think it is very important that we understand how critical it is that these foundational human rights, these foundational constitutional rights apply to all of us. There is a very famous poem. It starts with, "First they came for the socialists." And that is what we are seeing. First, they have come for the immigrants. And as they erase due process and they erase constitutional rights, they're erasing those rights for all of us.
Yeah, drop the mic. Okay. Well, thanks for the question. You sound like a political science major. I haven't heard the Overton window since my own time at UVM. I don't like the term illegal immigrant. I think that is jargon used by certain groups of people to demonize a group of people who I don't think should be demonized. If you cross the border and were unable to usually afford the ability to get the proper documentation, I don't think that makes you a criminal. I think that makes you unable to access a system that should be designed to help you live in a place and work in a place safely. So thank you for that question. And what is your name?
I'm Drew.
Okay. And what town are you in?
This is live. I don't want to dox myself.
I just meant if you're not from Windsor County. I don't know.
I don't have constituents.
It also doesn't make you a criminal even under our law, because being in this country without proper documentation is a civil offense, not a criminal one.
Sorry. I got in a habit.
Thank you all for those answers. I think we have time for one more, and I see your hand back there. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Molly Gray. I'm the outgoing executive director of the Vermont Afghan Alliance, and wanted to come tonight in solidarity and support of our amazing legislators, and Jill from VAAP just stepped out. 3 questions. And I'm sorry, I'm tired, and I just came in my everyday clothes. One around Merrimack. And if folks aren't following what's happening in Merrimack, New Hampshire, ICE is building a large detention facility, and the governor of Massachusetts recently came out in opposition to that, knowing that if folks are moved to Merrimack, that means they're leaving Vermont and we lose access. So what can the legislature do, either through resolution to support sort of Vermont standing against Merrimack? Two, I really wanted to come back to the legal representation bill. And I know many folks probably know this, but it is not ICE running facilities in Vermont, right? It is the Vermont Department of Corrections. And so even though we, Vermont, as a state, have a contract with ICE, it is Vermont law that applies within DOC facilities. So if there isn't access to an interpreter, to prayer, to halal food, for example, to medicine, that is a Vermont problem. And so while there's a lot that we can do to try to stop ICE from engaging in Vermont, once someone is detained, the only thing that we can do is make sure they have access to legal counsel. So I would argue that one of the most important bills, or so many, is the legal representation bill, because once someone's detained, if we don't have access, they're gone. And once they leave Vermont, there's nothing we can do. So having access to counsel is the most important thing. And at the Afghan Alliance, we saw an Afghan man who was detained by ICE without counsel or interpretation for a week, and thank goodness he was able to call his mom and then call us. And the final thing is food. As many probably know, H.R. 1, the not so one big beautiful bill, ended food assistance for a population in the state, and those are refugees and asylees, and they still don't have access to food. So if you're thinking about other ways to get involved, supporting USCRI, the Vermont Afghan Alliance, other organizations who are working directly with those who have lost food assistance, meaning they have no longer have access to SNAP, is super important. So 3 additional things, but mostly just to say thank you, gratitude, and I hope everyone will join me in a round of applause for our amazing panelists and for VPIRG.
Okay, that is all the time we have for public questions. Feel free to contact your legislators, one of my favorite sayings. Sorry. I'm going to pass it over to Jordan to close us out and facilitate any closing remarks.
As folks are putting their coats on, some of these legislators are going to answer some of those questions. Just noting the time, we are slowly starting to pack up, but there's a lot of important content here. So anyone who would like to touch on any of those questions, we're going to do that really quickly.
So we can absolutely do a resolution. We can absolutely put something forward to stand in solidarity with everything that's happening. But what I think we can actually tangibly do in law, and this is something I proposed last biennium, was to put in law that people who are detained in Vermont stay in Vermont. And I think that that's actually something pretty important. And this was through a lot of the negotiations about the ICE contract. But I think that that's kind of the bare minimum, that people aren't being spirited across state lines, whether that's followed or not. But I think once someone hits a Vermont DOC facility, we can regulate and say, no, they stay here now.
Yeah. And hang out with your friends in New Hampshire, and we're going to go protest in Merrimack in a couple weeks. So get ready. We're going to New Hampshire. We're taking a bus. That's the only other thing.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. I know we did not get to every single question. Everything we have written down, we are going to follow up with legislators on. Stay tuned for a very thorough follow-up email from me, and just know this is the first of many conversations we're going to have, so plenty more opportunities to get engaged. Thank you so much again to our panelists, to our partners, and to all of you for being here. Please get home safe and take care.
And thank you to Jordan. Go Jordan!